the whole complexity of pricing, just try to understand the fundamentals, at least the basic mechanisms, the ups and downs, the elasticities. It will help, definitely.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
It's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the historical relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving. Today, our guest is Alessandro Monti. Here are 3 things you want to know about Alessandro before we start. He is a professor for corporate management and organization at Cologne Business School. He's done stints at both SKP and Wolters Kluwer, 2 companies that I truly respect in world of pricing. And he went to UC Berkeley, as did I. Welcome, Alessandro.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me on the show. It's good to be here.
Hey, how'd you get into pricing in the first place?
We all have our story that we can tell, and it's always interesting to know how we kind of entered into this adventure. Now, the first touch point was, of course, during studies, microeconomics. I'm a trained sort of economist, and of course, you get the standard pricing approach, the supply and demand things there, but the real, let's say, management world touch point with pricing was my first job, which was at SKP. And since then, this topic, caught my attention, and I'm all in this topic. So that's the story.
So why do you stay? You're all in, but why?
I think prices in general, they I once read it was an article, and the quote was, well, they're the central hinges of the economy. So the price at the end of the day clears markets. Price is something that you feel as a consumer immediately. It's sometimes pain and it's sometimes pleasure. So it has the behavioral component, and I think that's what makes prices and dealing with pricing quite fascinating, for me at least.
Yeah, so I'll buy into the fact that it touches almost everything. So it's so powerful, and yet I love the fact that so few people understand it, which means that when we can advise them, we can have huge impacts in their lives and their businesses. So
definitely, I agree on that.
Nice. So you got a Ph.D. in business history. I have never heard of that before. And then you went to work for SKP. How did a Ph.D. in business history help you at SKP?
Well, it helped. It helped, first of all, from the, let's say, methodological perspective, learning the, let's say, more scientific tools and techniques. So it really does help in then tackling all those pricing questions that, of course, should be tackled from, let's say, a more profound way. Okay, so I always go, the fundamental way when it comes to pricing. So it helps, to have the tools and techniques, sort of this research perspective at hand. So it definitely helped. Well, just on a side note, when I talked to my SKP partners, because I actually did the PhD while being at SKP, so they kind of allowed me on a sabbatical. And when I kind of told my project and say, well, PhD and has this history component, I saw some question marks there and say, how does that now kind of translate into our everyday business? And at the end, I think it did. At the end, the research, the business history PhD helps you to understand probably the present and also get sort of a hint on what will come eventually in the future.
Nice. And so is it a quantitative PhD? When you do business history, you're still doing a bunch of stats and quantitative research and things like that?
Yeah. Well, you can do both ways. You can approach both ways. Now, what I did actually is I went into historical archives. So I really dig deep into the documents from the, let's say, early 17th century, and had to research them and had to read them and had to understand how, let's say, executives back at that time decided on pricing and pricing strategies. Of course, you can do the quantitative approach. You need to have the data set, so you need to have some numbers eventually. For that period in history, it's already like a jackpot having documents at all. So the point here was really to understand the decision making at that time. So it's a more qualitative approach at the end.
Nice. Well, what do you say we jump to the current day? And what
Sure.
nowadays, you're a professor, of course,
Yeah.
but you also do coaching of businesses in the world of pricing and strategy. First off, what kind of businesses do you typically coach?
Well, in the last couple of weeks, I have been involved with quite some few of the early stage startups. So it's basically digital. It's the tech related startup scene that I have been involved with. And I have been in touch also with small and medium-sized companies. So not the kind of blue chip big ones, but rather either it's a startup. So we have quite some interesting founders that were once students with us and then decided to found their own businesses and try to establish a startup. And they call me up and say, "Hey, Prof, I remember your lecture. Now I need the real deal with the prices. Tell me, what should the price be?" And of course, I'm really happy, to walk them through some pricing stuff. So that has been my involvement with coaching and consulting. Yes.
Nice. I have been teaching pricing for probably 20 some years. And one of the
Wow.
things that I find fascinating is I think I'm explaining it really well. And then when someone goes to actually apply it, it's just so hard for them. And I think it's because we've internalized all these concepts so well that we can do that. And yet, even if you paid attention in class and you learn the concepts, applying them is still really hard.
I agree. I tend to agree. You know what? Well, my impression is it's because the discipline is so complex. It seems to be easy. Hey, it's a price tag. I sell the product and I cash in and everything's okay. But the complexity, I mean, anytime I start a lecture on elasticities, my students, I hope nobody is listening, but at the end, it's difficult because it's so abstract. But then you realize, hey, this is real life. There is some reaction to price changes in demand. So that scares some people off. But once they have reached this sort of tipping point, and everything then sort of starts to make sense.
Yeah, I'm always thinking of new frameworks that I like to apply. And so one of the thoughts that I've been having recently is the difference between quantitative pricing and I'm going to say value pricing. Now, I get we all want to charge value-based pricing. We don't want to do cost-plus pricing. But the way I see the difference is I see a lot of pricing people using scatter plots and trying to say, hey, I want to move these points up. And then I see other pricing people saying, how do my customers value my products? And what are the capabilities? And what's the ROI going to be for them?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see a huge difference between those two? And do you see them merging as you work with clients?
That's actually a very good point there. Now, you know what? My impression is that the one element that you mentioned, so hey, we have the scatter plot, we have the data, the numbers. It's first of all always historic or at least kind of real time, and it never is, let's say, the reflection of possible future customer, let's say, behavioral elements. I know there are algorithms. I know there is, the machine learning that tries to kind of grasp the complexity of this behavioral element. But the quant part will always, first of all, be the reflection of the data that, I have as an input. And it's kind of, first of all, historical data. And now bringing this then towards, future decisions that customers may take, I think that's the part where we need that business sense, that business judgment. We need that, managerial decision making capability, to connect, to like virtually and literally connect the dots. So I see there the shift towards management, but that's kind of our role as well, to build these bridges between those two worlds and facilitate things. So we're not there, still not there yet, but I think eventually we'll get there, definitely.
Yeah, you could almost think about this as the difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics.
Yeah,
right? Where one is we're looking
true.
at the mathematical piece of it and ignoring the individual decision piece, and then the other one we're looking at the individual decisions.
That's a good point. Yeah, macro, micro. Although there are so lots of theories that then try to blend those two together, but then again there starts the complexity. Okay, there starts the real theoretical approach, and when we talk to students or to customers or to other interested people, I say, yeah, now tell me, what about the real world? So yeah, fascinating though. Micro, never thought about that.
Yes. So the real world is so hard because there's nuances to everything we do. You can't take any one concept and say that applies everywhere. It is just so hard.
Oh, wow. I mean, the theory that tries to explain like the whole of real world, I think that's probably not even the real goal of a theory. It's always kind of that slice of life that you need to understand in a better way. But yeah, that's a scientific approach. I always kind of torn in between those two worlds, the scientific world and then the hands-on management approach. Sometimes it's difficult to bring this together and sometimes not. It really depends on the question that you have at hand and want to solve.
Yeah. What do you see are the biggest problems with your customers, the people that you're coaching or teaching, helping them solve their own pricing problems? What do you see them as missing most often?
That's a good one there. I would have to say the overall level of knowledge has increased. If I remember when I started at SKP back in 2004, my impression was that this was still, well, I'm not saying a black box, but the level of knowledge was not what I now tend to perceive. So we have come quite a long way. Major pain points are still what I especially see now with my startups. The question, hey, what should be the price? I mean, the question is so easy. Hey, what should I charge? How much? And then I start, willingness to pay, and of course historical data. You can go, Investor, Bell Granger, and all of this. But eventually there is this key question: how much? And I see so many executives and even my sort of students in the startups struggling with that one apparently basic question. So probably there's still a lot to do in giving them a hands-on approach, a process, how to derive that, well, not perfect price, but that one price that fits in the first place, to then fine-tune and detail it out. So easy question, probably complicated answer.
Yeah, what I find really interesting is the answer to that question probably is less important than the rest of the business you just built.
Yeah,
right? And
exactly.
And yet people think it's the most important thing. Oh, I got to get the price right.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's the first question. As a founder, say, oh no, I have the business plan. Oh, the VCs. Oh, they want to see something. I have to write something down. And well, yeah. What about your processes? I mean, what about the next steps? What about all the implementation? What about differentiation? What about all the other thing? Yeah. We'll come to that later on, where it should be actually right from the start, this whole process and an implemented process.
I think if people understood what value-based pricing really meant and what value really means, and they understood it when they started their company, they would build different products, they would build different business models. They would think about the way they're doing things very differently. So,
yeah, I agree, Mark. I think but you know what? My impression is that so many really brilliant founders, however, are kind of driven in a different direction because they, want to scale probably too early, too fast. They're sales driven. Hey, I need the numbers, I need the volume. And the VCs, lurking in, the background and say, hey, I want to see, numbers, so that eventually the value aspect then is put in the second place. So yeah, that could be something to work on and establish the true sense of what is value. By the way, this has been, coming back to the historical part, a question since like ages. What is value? What is the true and fair price? We see this like in the medieval ages. We see this in ancient Rome, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been kind of the universal question since ever.
well, I think that's a great question that I'll ask you. What is a fair price? How do you decide what fair means?
Yeah, I saw that coming. That's
Well, you teed it
yeah,
up.
yeah. I know. But yeah, fairness. The concept of fairness. Gosh, this is so again, this is so individual at the end of the day. I'm a big fan of, hey, if I'm able to charge, at the level of an individual's willingness to pay, and I deliver value, and the customer is willing to pay for that, that seems to be like a fair transaction. Now, that's kind of I would say the small version of that. When we extend this into bigger spheres, we have political impact, we have social impact, we have availability of products. I mean, we see this now actually as we speak, and in Europe we have the vaccine for the COVID is rolling out. The question is, what is the fair price? Ask the pharma companies, they will tell you something else that the authorities. So I think the notion of a fair price has to include also the bigger questions that tackle society and whole countries and nations. But that's something where there is the touch point. Hey, there's a government, we need to intervene and we need to make sure that everybody receives this. Tough question though. I admit.
So I was interviewing Reed Holden a few episodes ago, and one of the things he said, and I wish I would have pushed back on it, but I didn't at the time, is he said, as we build these relationships with our big customers and their long-term strategic relationships, we need to charge them fair prices, right? And it's like, well, I don't know what that means. What is a fair price?
Yeah, I mean, a fair price, again, let me see what the ancient Romans would have answered to it. Back in the days, the fair price was, hey, I got my costs, this was labor, this was raw material, and I apply a decent markup that is at least deemed to be decent. I'm not kind of exaggerating, like I'm not doubling up, but it's not like 5%, and it's okay, and everybody will be fine. Nobody's questioning this. So that was, since many decades and centuries, the perception of, yeah, this is a fair price because for the product you had these expenses, you worked on it, you produced something, applied a markup, and that was okay, right? So from a mere, let's say, theoretical perspective, cost plus seems to indicate, hey, that's a fair price then at the end.
And I think even today in our world, people look at cost plus as fair.
Yeah, definitely.
So
yeah, because everybody understands, that was the cost. Of course, the company needs, to source the material, it needs to distribute stuff, and it's accepted. It's widely accepted. By the way, I had once a really nice master thesis from one of my students. There was a question saying, okay, if I adjust my prices, and that was in an online e-commerce setting. So if I adjust my prices and I'm not giving you the reason why I just adjusted my prices. So for example, I increased them. So how would you then perceive this adjustment to be? And then the student kind of created like a fairness index. So you ask certain questions and you're able to then create this kind of index. And you know what? Just giving no reason performed far worse than giving the reason, hey, I had to increase because of cost. I had to increase because of competition. So this actually scored better results with customers versus the scenario and just saying nothing. So because competition, because certain market, developments and cost seems to, be something as fair for the consumers. So that was quite an interesting result there.
Yeah, I could easily see where blaming costs, increasing costs, is a reason that people would accept a price increase.
Yeah.
Now, here's a really interesting one, because if you're going to think about cost plus as defining fair, how do you price software? So the price of software is never fair because the incremental cost is always really close to zero.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, with software, we have seen value-based approaches perform quite nicely with customers. So the very famous kind of 10x approach seems to solve the equation, because the narrative there is, hey, look, basically I have here a software. Let's assume it saves you like 2 hours of your daily work routine. So 2 hours that you could like technically use somewhere else. So you have those opportunity costs, and I am willing now to charge 10 times the value of these kind of 2 hours that you save. So that's a narrative at the end of the day that is understood, and that could be an approach in selling this fair story. So software can use this, and it's value. At the end of the day, software, the whole digital world, it's about the value. It's about the value and monetize the value. We have so many monetization paths now in the digital world, because the digital good now has all these fascinating characteristics that the offline good does not have. And it just opens up so many opportunities and options that you have to go value-based.
Yeah, what's so fascinating about this is that software companies don't have a choice, right? Digital companies really have to do value-based. And yet, now that they do that, you can look back at hardware companies and start to say, oh, we don't have to use the pricing metric we've always used, or we could do subscriptions in hardware, or we could, right? There's so many different things that we could take. Now that we think about it so much in software, how do I turn around and apply that back to hardware? The biggest problem with hardware has always been, I've got this physical cost and I need to make sure I cover my cost. So cost plus feels right. It's just like, oh, get rid of that. Get rid of that.
I think that was the trend. What was it in the 1990s? Hey, let's go servitization, right? So actually, the hardware is just the byproduct, and let's earn big money, with the installation, any other fees, the service, et cetera, et cetera. I see that actually with Apple, by the way, starting from the mere hardware, selling, and now the move into this recurring revenue, into this subscription. And I think they still are not there where they want to be, but it's a shift. So eventually, in the near future, the hardware, so like the product, the item, probably not as that important as the whole other digital ecosystem.
Yep. Yeah. Nice. Alessandro, this has been a lot of fun, but we're going to have to wrap this up here. What's final question? What's one piece of pricing advice that you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
Wow, just one. Oh gosh.
Just one.
Actually, that's what I tend to also tell my students, but it's not limited to students. I think that's something that is of value to everybody involved in the pricing. My advice would be learn the fundamentals. Try to understand the fundamentals don't try to kind of, hack yourself somehow through the price, or don't try to, go for some shortcuts. Wow, eventually that's not gonna really pay off as, the other option. Learn the fundamentals, understand the kind of basic mechanisms. And I think in the long run, this will yield you by far better results, than just the easy and, quick, approach to pricing.
And what would you think those fundamentals are? You don't have to describe them, but I'm just curious which fundamentals we're talking about.
The fundamentals is basically, understand that with price, it's just then not automatically sales. There is, of course, you need to have a look at your costs internally. You need to look at competition. You need to look then at the broader market. You need to differentiate. You need to then have, a basic understanding on the behavioral component of that. So it just so much more than just, hey, let's try this, let's test this online. And if it performs better than the other option, yeah, that's the best option. Well, probably not. So again, what we then started discussing, the whole complexity of pricing, just try to understand the fundamentals, at least the basic mechanisms, the ups and downs, the elasticities. It will help, definitely.
Awesome. Alessandro, thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to, just reach out to me. And I think that's, the best way to get in touch with me. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Episode 102 is all done. To our listeners, would you please leave us a review? These are very valuable to us. They're very helpful. Josh Christ recently said, empowering, insightful, and actionable. Whether you're well established as a pricing innovator or just getting started carving out a profitable niche that's ready to grow, this is a must-listen podcast for you. Mark does an incredible job leading conversations that cover a huge breadth of topics related to the ins and outs of building a thriving pricing strategy with leaders who've actually experienced success themselves. Highly recommended listening and subscribing. And thank you, Josh, for that. Would you please see if you can do better than Josh did? That was pretty good, though. We're working on a new website right now. Impactpricing.com is now going to be the place where we host all of our content, main feed on the main page. Feel free to swing by and see if we've got that launched yet. We've also recently upgraded our studio, so the AV quality of our courses is getting better and better. Content's always been awesome, but come check out the AV quality. If you have any questions or comments about the podcast or about pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.